my fingers, driving them deep down into his lean, sinewy throat. With frantic speed I pulled him along the passage up to a window through which the moonlight was shining. Here I released my hold of his throat, but immediately covered him with my revolver. "Down on your knees, or you're a dead man," I cried. "Confess everything, or I shoot you through the heart." His courage had evidently forsaken him. He began to whimper and cry bitterly. "Spare my life, spare my life," he cried. "I will tell you everything, only spare my life." "Be quick about it," I said. "I am in no humour to be merciful. Out with the truth." I was listening anxiously for the wife's step, but except for the low hum of machinery and the splashing of the water, I heard nothing. "Speak," I said, giving the old man a shake. His lips trembled. His words came out falteringly. "It was Wentworth's doing," he panted. "Wentworth? Not the murdered man?" I cried. "No, no, his cousin. The ruffian who has been the curse of my life. Owing to that last death he inherits the property. He is the real owner of the mill, and he invented the revolving floor. There were deaths. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It was so easy, and I wanted the money. The police never suspected, nor did the doctors. Wentworth was bitter hard on me, and I got into his power." Here he choked and sobbed. "I'm a miserable old man, sir," he gasped. "So you killed your victims for the sake of money?" I said, grasping him by the shoulder. "Yes," he said, "yes. The bailiff had £20 all in gold. No one ever knew. I took it and was able to satisfy Wentworth for a bit." "And what about Archibald Wentworth?" "That was his doing, and I was to be paid." "And now finally you wanted to get rid of me?" "Yes, for you suspected." As I spoke I perceived by the ghastly light of the moon another door near. I opened it and saw that it was the entrance to a small dark lumber room. I pushed the old man in, turned the key in the lock, and ran downstairs. The wife was still unaccountably absent. I opened the front door, and trembling, exhausted, drenched in perspiration, found myself in the open air. Every nerve was shaken. At that terrible moment I was not in the least master of myself. My one desire was to fly from the hideous place. I had just reached the little gate when a hand, light as a feather, touched my arm. I looked up. The girl Liz stood before me. "You are saved," she said. "Thank God! I tried all I could to stop the wheel. See, I am drenched to the skin. I could not manage it, but at least I locked Granny up. She's in the kitchen, sound asleep. She drank a lot of gin." "Where were you all day yesterday?" I asked. "Locked up in a room in the further tower, but I managed to squeeze through the window, though it half killed me. I knew if you stayed they would try it on tonight. Thank God, you are saved." "Well, don't keep me now," I said. "I have been saved as by a miracle. You are a good girl, and I am much obliged to you. You must tell me another time how you managed to live through all these horrors." "Ain't I all but mad?" was her pathetic reply. "Oh, my God, what I suffer!" She pressed her hand to her face. The look in her eyes was terrible. But I could not wait now to talk to her further. I hastily left the place. How I reached Harkhurst I can never tell, but early in the morning I found myself there. I went straight to Dr. Stanmore's house, and having got him up, I communicated my story. He and I together immediately visited the Superintendent of Police. Having told my exciting tale, we took a trap and all three returned to the Castle Inn. We were back there before 8 o'clock on the following morning. But as the police officer expected, the place was empty. Bindloss had been rescued from the dark closet, and he and his wife and the girl Liz had all flown. The doctor, the police officer, and I all went up to the circular room. We then descended to the basement, and after a careful examination we discovered a low door, through which we crept. We then found ourselves in a dark vault which was full of machinery. By the light of a lantern we examined it. Here we saw an explanation of the whole trick. The shaft of the mill wheel, which was let through the wall of the tower, was continuous as the axle of a vertical cogged wheel, and by a multiplication action turned a large horizontal wheel into which a vertical shaft descended. This shaft was let into the centre of 4 cross beams supporting the floor of the room in which I had slept. All round the circular edge of the floor was a steel rim which turned in a circular socket. It needed but a touch to set this hideous apparatus in motion. The police immediately started in pursuit of Bindloss, and I returned to London. That evening Edgecombe and I visited Dr. Miles Gordon. Hard-headed old physician that he was, He was literally aghast when I told him my story. He explained to me that a man placed in the position in which I was when the floor began to move would by means of centrifugal force suffer from enormous congestion of the brain. In fact, the revolving floor would induce an artificial condition of apoplexy. If the victim were drugged or even only sleeping heavily, and the floor began to move slowly, insensibility would almost immediately be induced, which would soon pass into coma and death, and a post-mortem examination some hours afterward would show no cause for death, as the brain would appear perfectly healthy, the blood having again left it. From the presence of Dr. Miles Gordon, Edgcombe and I went to Scotland Yard, and the whole affair was put into the hands of the London detective force. With the clue which I had almost sacrificed my life to furnish, they quickly did the rest. Wentworth was arrested, and under pressure was induced to make a full confession, but old Bindloss had already told me the gist of the story. Wentworth's father had owned the mill, had got into trouble with the law, and changed his name. In fact, he had spent 5 years in penal servitude. He then went to Australia and made money. He died when his son was a young man. This youth inherited all the father's vices. He came home, visited the mill, and being of a mechanical turn of mind, invented the revolving floor. He changed the mill into an inn, put Bindloss, one of his "pals," into possession with the full intention of murdering unwary travellers from time to time for their money. The police, however, wanted him for a forged bill, and he thought it best to fly. Bindloss was left in full possession. Worried by Wentworth, who had him in his power for a grave crime committed years ago, he himself on 2 occasions murdered a victim in the circular room. Meanwhile, several unexpected deaths had taken place in the older branch of the Wentworth family, and Archibald Wentworth alone stood between his cousin and the great estates. Wentworth came home, and with the aid of Bindloss got Archibald into his power. The young artist slept in the fatal room, and his death was the result. At this moment Wentworth and Bindloss are committed for trial at the Old Bailey, and there is no doubt what the result will be. The ghost mystery in connection with the Castle Inn has, of course, been explained away for ever. End of Chapter 1.